The Adventures of Tintin, Land of Black Gold. So, if you've been following along with me on my journey through these Tintin books, you'll perhaps know that I started out reading them in order, or at least trying to, and got through the first several in order. But then I ran into a problem where the library didn't have books or they were checked out. So I had to jump ahead towards the seven crystal balls, which ended on a cliffhanger. And that cliffhanger supposedly gets resolved in Prisoners of the Sun, but somebody else has got that checked out of the library. So I'm jumping forward another book to Tintin, Land of Black Gold. Now, I'm combining this with information I got from Wikipedia. And The Land of Black Gold is another one of these Tintin books that's got quite a behind the scenes story. The previous one I reviewed, the Seven Crystal Balls, had another complicated behind the scenes story, but this is another one of them. So the author's name, which I believe is pronounced Herge, began writing this story originally after King Odokar's scepter. Uh, but the story got interrupted by the Nazi invasion of Belgium, so he had to switch to writing The Crab with the Golden Claws. I think I actually talked about this briefly in my review of The Crab of the Golden Claws. The Black Land of the Black Gold, apparently in its initial publication, featured Germany as the bad guys. So once the Germans were in control, you couldn't continue that story, and so it switched to a more politically neutral story, the Crab with the Golden Claws, and continued, I guess, what were considered politically neutral stories all throughout the Nazi occupation of Belgium. Um, then, once the Nazis left, there was this whole thing while he was being accused of a Nazi collaborator, which is all on Wikipedia, and I talked about some of that in my review of the Seven Crystal Balls. Um, but yeah, he had this half-finished story, The Land of the Black Gold, which he had started serializing in the papers but had never finished. According to Wikipedia, Herge didn't particularly want to finish it. He wasn't enthusiastic about coming back to repair old stories. But he hit a spell where he was very depressed and had physical problems and was having trouble working. So people close to him suggested that he could cut down on his workload by just going back to the Land of Black Gold, which he had never finished, and finishing that off, which would mean that the story was already half done. So he started serializing the story again from the beginning, back in the late 40s. But then, like a lot of these Tintin stories, all of these Tintin stories, it underwent a couple more revisions after that. Was colorized, was reprinted in the 70s, translated into English. And there were some more major revisions at that time. I guess, according to Wikipedia, in the original version of this story, it takes place in what was at that time British Palestine. I guess in the 1970s, you already had the wars breaking out in Palestine. And so it was a sensitive topic, so the English publishers asked him to change it. So he changed it to a made up Arab country, which was, what was it called? Kahimid or something like that. It's in here somewhere. So it's all made up Arab country here, because it was too sensitive to talk about Palestine anymore. But originally I guess this was Tintin's adventures in Palestine back in the days when it was still under British uh, British occupation. So it's a, I guess maybe as you can guess from that introduction, that's a receipt. I don't need that. It's got a bit of a Frankenstein type feel to it, where there are various different elements. So it starts out with war looming. Tintin is reading the papers. Crisis deepens. Official. On the brink of war. Are we prepared? Call up for army reserves. Forces on standby. Things look bright, I must say. And this is repeated a couple more times. Here's Tintin listening to the radio. Massive troop movements are also reported. The Prime Minister told the House today that the world situation is grave, but the government has taken all steps necessary to meet an emergency. The news goes from bad to worse. One single spark could set the world ablaze. Comes back to this a little bit later. He says, war. It's horrible. I can't get it out of my mind. Surely to goodness the statesmen will come to their senses. Now, presumably, this was written before World War II, before the Nazis invaded Belgium, although right on the eve of that. So I don't know. Perhaps around the time France and England were declaring war on Germany, or something like that. But for the story that takes place in the Tintin continuity at this point, after Prisoners of the Sun, so now it's taking place in, I don't know, the late 40s, early 50s. So now, like, what is this big troop buildup? What is this war? I mean, what is this supposed to mean in the present Tintin continuity? It's not clear, and I guess it's left deliberately vague like that. I mean, it's also not clear how much of this is the original dialogue from the 1939 comic, and how much of this is from the late 40s comic, and how much of this is from the 70s comic. I mean, I find this a little bit haunting here. It's horrible. I can't get it out of my mind. Surely to goodness the statesmen will come to their senses. Because, of course, we know that they didn't manage to come to their senses. So if this was... if this was the original dialogue here, that's a little bit haunting, isn't it? But I mean, I guess you read anything from that era, and everybody was obsessed with what they viewed as the coming war. This is something else I was reminded of with George Orwell's book Coming Up for Air, which was also written in the late 30s. It was also clearly anticipating the war. Anyways, we've got a line here. The phone rings. This is right here on page 3, right at the beginning. The phone rings, and it's Captain Haddock, who says, "I've just had Admiralty orders. Captain Haddock, immediate. Proceed to assume command of merchant vessel. Blank blank. The name secret, of course. At blank will you will receive further orders." So that's that. I've been mobilized. No, there won't be any time to see you. I'm off right away. I'll keep in touch. Bye, Tintin. And then he is just gone, and he is out of the story, which makes sense because Captain Haddock didn't get introduced until The Crab with the Golden Claws, which was written after this story, or at least after this story, the after this story had been abandoned. According to Wikipedia, in the initial syndication of this story, uh, I it got all the way up to the confrontation in the desert with Dr. Mueller here. It's page 28 in my version. Yeah, before it was canceled because of the Nazis invading. Now then, when it was recontinued, then Captain Haddock does come back near the end. Where is he? Well, there he is. But where does he first come back? Okay, page 54. So he comes back near the end. Yeah, I'll get to that a little bit later. There's some humorous stuff going on. So yeah, what we have is a Tintin story that is stitched together from this era of Tintin and this era of Tintin. And as I noted in my review of the Seven Crystal Balls, the tone of the storytelling changes. The earlier stories are much more hectic and a bit more random with the slapstick, whereas the later stories... Sorry, I shouldn't make too many generalizations. I'm just going off of the Seven Crystal Balls, but based on that story, the pacing was much slower and the build-up was much better. But I was double-checking this on Wikipedia, reading the Wikipedia entry before filming, and according to the critics, this also seems to be a common opinion, that it's stitching together two different eras of Tintin with a different storytelling style. There are characters brought in from earlier Tintin books. The antagonist is Dr. Mueller, who was from the Black Island. Although I have to confess, I probably would have missed that myself if it wasn't pointed out by the asterisks. And speaking of which, there's another character, the merchant, who was from Cigars of the Pharaohs. And again, I think I would have missed that if it wasn't for the asterisks. I feel a little bit embarrassed to mention this because, I only read these books a couple months ago. And already I have forgotten these characters. Kind of. I mean, once the asterisks jogged my memory, I think I could vaguely remember a character like this. But, when these stories were serialized, this was like 15 years in between, I think, this one and when Cigars of the Pharaohs came out. So, yeah, that's Herge, the author, is obviously relying on long memories of his readers here, which unfortunately my memory was not quite up to the challenge. But that's what we have these little asterisks for, to jog your memory. There's a clever thing going on, which comes in the second half of the book, where the leader, what's his name? Refer to him as Master. I forget if he's a sheik or an emir, or what do they call it? Your Highness, whoever this guy is, whatever his title is. The oil companies are trying to negotiate with him, and then they kidnap his son. But it turns out his son is just a little monster who is causing trouble to everybody. His kidnappers, and then when Tintin tries to rescue him, he doesn't want to be rescued. According to Wikipedia, this was based on one of the last kings of Iraq, who became king at the age of 4 when he inherited the throne. There's a picture of him actually on the Wikipedia page for Tintin and the Land of the Black Gold. And that picture of the young child king does look like this character in the comic. So I guess that's obviously what the inspiration is. Although Wikipedia said obviously the inspiration also comes from O. Henry, which yeah. I could have put that one together without Wikipedia, actually. Every now and again, I draw one of these connections myself. I've not actually read that O. Henry story. I think it's called, what is it called? The Ransom of Chief something or other. About kidnappers who kidnap a little boy who ends up being an absolute terror. And then the kidnappers can't wait to get rid of the boy. But despite not having read it, I'm familiar with it just through cultural osmosis. So that's kind of what this is. It's kind of funny. Like Tintin goes to rescue him, and he doesn't want to be rescued. He thinks it's just a fun game to be playing with the kidnappers. Does not realize what danger he's in. The kid also releases sneezing powder everywhere. So there's this scene where Tintin is confronting the evil Dr. Mueller, but they're both sneezing so much that they can't seem to. Every time one of them is trying to land a punch, they get distracted by a sneeze. The father is really indulgent of him. Keeps referring to his pranks as just kind of innocent little childish pranks. But then, so this is after he's been kidnapped. After they realize he's been kidnapped, the father is crying, and then he's meeting, and it turns out that his kid, before he got kidnapped, replaced the cigars with exploding cigars. So it says, Allah is good. My little poppet replaced all my best Havanas with trick cigars. Wasn't that sweet? My one and only little chickadee. By the beard of the prophet, that wretched little centipede has changed all my best Sobranis for his filthy joke cigarettes. So the way his father is sad that he's been kidnapped, but then so quickly goes to being irritated. And then jokes continue when Captain Haddock comes on the scene. Captain Haddock is actually the only character I actually give him a spanking. I love the way Snowy the dog is looking so smugly at him. The kid had been trying to catch Snowy the dog. And then, but then that spanking doesn't seem to do any good. The kid continues to terrorize. Bang! Billions of blistering barnacles, you Arabian nightmare. So blistering barnacles is what Captain Haddock always says. It's like his way of swearing. So he's always swearing at the kid, blistering barnacles. And then at the end, turns out that the kid has developed an attachment to him. He's being returned to his father. And he's like, my sweetest strawberry angel cake. Captain Haddock says, at last, now I can have a quiet smoke. Kid says, well, want to stay with blistering barnacles. So he's thinks that Captain Haddock's name is blistering barnacles. My nose, billions of blistering barnacles, my nose. Again, burn your nose again. Um, yeah, and Captain Haddock, by the way, this is another thing I thought was kind of funny. He shows up, and now, of course, he's been gone the whole story because he got written out at the beginning because he wasn't in Tintin continuity when the story was originally written. But page 54, he comes back. And yeah, they say, and what are you doing here anyway, Captain? He said, well, I'll tell you, it's just like this. And Tintin says, sorry, Captain. First, have they found the Emir's son? Yeah. So Emir is what his name is. So they're running around, and they're in the car. And but tell me, Captain, you still haven't explained how you came to be here. And he says, well, it's quite simple, really, but also rather complicated. First, I must tell you, and then forgive me, Captain. I'm sorry, I interrupted. You were saying? So he keeps trying to tell the story. Well, as I said, it was quite simple and at the same time rather complicated. You remember, look ahead. And this just continues several times where he keeps trying to tell the story of how he was able to get over here to join Tintin. And several times gets to start. It's quite simple but rather complicated. And then at the end, says, you know, Captain, you still haven't told us how you came to be mixed up in this business. Oh, yes, well, I thank you, Your Highness. Well, it's like this. I think I told you. It's quite simple, really, and at the same time, rather complicated. Would you believe it? And then the cigar explodes. Another of Abdullah's little tricks. And he promised me he'd be good. What adorable little ways he has. Adorable? Adorable, I'll say he is. Well, if you want to hear my story, it won't be from me. Blistering barnacles, as far as I'm concerned, this is the end. And then that's the end. I mean, we never find out how Captain Haddock ended up over with Tintin. So I found that. I found that the humor made me chuckle. I mean, it wasn't. I don't know if it was laugh out loud funny, but it was worth a chuckle. Now again, this is mostly everything I've been talking about here is coming from the second half. The first half is more the slapstick that I think the earlier Tintin was more heavy on. So again, that just shows us how the story is a bit of a Frankenstein. According to Wikipedia, this is the last Tintin story in which the Thompson twins figure prominently. Sorry, I should say, according to Wikipedia, this was something one of the critics mentioned in the critical response section of Wikipedia. It wasn't the authorial voice of Wikipedia, as it were. But yeah, I don't know, because at the moment I've not read anything beyond here yet. Still trying to go in order as much as I can. So we'll see if that becomes true in these later books. Yeah, what else did I want to say about this? I think I've largely said all the stuff that was interesting to me. Yeah, why don't I just go ahead and finish this review here.